2. Lionheart. Alfred was as far from an ordinary 12-year-old boy as you could imagine. Inside he felt ordinary, but he'd been told time and time again by grown-ups that he was anything but. Alfred was not just plain old Alfred, he was Prince Alfred. His father was the king. One day he would be crowned king, King Alfred II, ruler of Britain and all its people. The strange thing was that he would become king of a kingdom he had never set foot in. Not once had he been outside Buckingham Palace. The boy's sad face could often be glimpsed at his bedroom window at the very top of the building. Just above his window, a flag flew on the roof of the palace. For hundreds of years, it had been the Union Jack, the red, white and blue flag of the United Kingdom. Now, a very different flag flew, one that the Lord Protector himself had instigated. It was a black flag with a golden griffin at its centre. This was a symbol of a new order of things. Britain now had no government, so no prime minister or politicians representing the people. It also had no police force. Instead, the king's personal army, the royal guards, enforced the rule of law. Buckingham Palace had been home to the British royal family for centuries. Since the time of George III, from his history books, Alfred had learned that it had become a royal residence way back in 1761. This palace used to be a sanctuary. Now it was a fortress. The members of the Royal Guard were stationed all along the perimeter wall. The soldiers were instantly recognizable by their long flowing red robes, hoods and horrifying gold skull masks. On their arms they wore black bands with the golden griffin at the centre, just like the one on the flag. Despite looking almost medieval, the Royal Guards were armed with laser guns. Just one zap was enough to blast someone into oblivion. These soldiers guarded those who lived inside Buckingham Palace. The palace had seen better days. The carpets were worn and the wallpaper was peeling off the walls. But it was still a special place. The prince's bedroom was furnished only with antiques. He slept in a 4-poster bed in silk pyjamas, though the bed creaked and the pyjamas had holes in them. The palace kitchen was stocked with every dish imaginable, as long as it came out of a tin. There were food stocks to last 100 years or more. Alfred was safe inside the palace, or so he thought. The boy pressed his face closer to the window as the domed roof of St. Paul's Cathedral caved in. Despite the horror, Alfred couldn't look away. Then, in an instant, he became distracted. There was a commotion in the corridor. He could hear a struggle and shouts just beyond his bedroom door. "Take your filthy hands off me! How dare you! I am your queen!" It was his mother's voice. As fast as he could, which wasn't very fast, Alfred limped across his bedroom and opened the door. The queen was being held roughly by 2 members of the Royal Guard. They were meant to protect the royal family, so why were they dragging her along as if she was a criminal? These were strange times, but this was the strangest time of all. "Mamma!" cried Alfred after her. The queen was wearing her long lace nightdress and one slipper. Even though she was being manhandled, she was trying to maintain some sense of dignity. This was a lady who prided herself on never having a hair out of place. Alfred had not seen his mother without her hair perfectly lacquered in a do and her face painted with makeup. Right now, her do was unraveling fast. Instead of makeup, her face was covered in thick night cream. She looked a sight. Alfred idolized his mother, and it was weird seeing her like this. "Alfred!" she shouted over her shoulder, struggling with the soldiers to make them stop. Because their faces were hidden behind the gold skull masks, it was impossible to guess what they were thinking. The royal guards remained silent throughout, which only added to the sense that this was a nightmare. "Mamma, where are they taking you?" demanded Alfred. "Get back inside your room, Alfred, and lock the door," she shouted back. "But, no, and promise me you'll stay there." The boy did not reply. "Promise," she pleaded. "I promise," he mumbled. Shocked at what he'd just witnessed, Alfred retreated and slammed his bedroom door shut. Stump! He stood dead still, unable to move. It was as if he were underwater. That too made it feel like being in a nightmare. But this was no nightmare. This was really happening. As to prove that, tears welled in the boy's eyes that streamed down his face. His mother, whom he loved more than anyone, was being dragged away into the night, and he was helpless to stop it. Alfred looked around his bedroom. There were silver-framed photographs of her everywhere. Here she was, reading him a bedtime story. There she was, pushing him on a rocking horse. Here she was, helping him draw a picture. There she was, playing with his train set. Here she was, painting his face like a lion. There she was, helping him blow out all the candles on a birthday cake. Here she was, giving him a teddy bear. In each picture, the young boy was basking in the glow of her love. In one of the photographs, Alfred was dressed up in the suit of armour as Richard the Lionheart. Richard I was the heroic king from the 12th century, who'd led crusades in far-off lands. Alfred picked up the picture and studied it. Lionheart. That was his mother's pet name for him. Tears welled in the boy's eyes. He always felt unworthy of that name. He felt nothing like a hero. Having been ill all his life, Alfred was used to being an object of pity. Sometimes even pitied himself. Tears ran down his cheeks. He felt helpless to stop his mother being dragged away by the royal guards. Other important people had been mysteriously disappeared in the night over the years. The Prime Minister, the Chief of Police, the head of the army. Even Alfred's grandmother had suffered the same fate. Lionheart. His mother's voice calling him that name circled round and round in his mind. Lionheart. Lionheart had been a mighty warrior. Alfred needed to summon some of his great ancestor spirit and do something. Anything. Lionheart! He said out loud, and despite what he had said, he promised his mother. He opened his bedroom door. Creak! Chapter 3 of The Beast of Buckingham Palace by David Walliams, narrated by me. Chapter 3 Faceless Fiends. Alfred limped down the corridor, steadying himself on the sideboard to catch his breath. Quite a few paces ahead, the royal guard's cloaks fluttered as they bustled the boy's mother along. Alfred tried to speed up, but in doing so, he stumbled over a rug. Thud! Twisting his ankle. Ouch! With no chance of catching up with them, he thought of Richard the Lionheart and called out, I command you to stop! Not only was Alfred out of breath, but he was not used to giving orders. As a result, the words came out wonky. Despite Alfred being royal and these being the royal guards, the pair of faceless fiends ignored him. The Queen turned her head and shouted back to her son, Please, Alfred! I don't want you to see this! There was a look of terror in her eyes. His mother had always been a wonder at pretending everything was tickety-boo, when it clearly wasn't. She would always make up stories to cover up what was really going on. The sound of an explosion in the middle of the night was nothing more than a thunderstorm. She would then stroke Alfred's head until he drifted off back to sleep. After his grandmother had mysteriously gone missing one night from the palace, Mother would make believe that Grammy had written postcards to him. She was the old queen, his father's widowed mother, and much loved by the boy. Alfred always called her Grammy, because when he was little, he couldn't say Granny. His mother would read these postcards aloud to him as she put him to bed at night. Dearest darling grandson, I'm writing to you from the deck of a splendid old cruise ship. I'm sailing around and round the world. Please don't worry about me. I will see you again one day, I promise. I miss you and I love you. Slobbery kisses, Grammy. My darling grandson Alfred, just a little postcard to tell you all is well. Would you believe I'm all the way up Mount Everest? It was quite a hike, but I can see for miles and miles and miles. It is wondrous. I want you to know that even though I am far from you, you are always in my heart. I miss you more than ever. Kisses and cuddles, Grammy. It was only when Alfred grew older that he suspected his mother had written all the postcards herself. When he asked whether they would ever set foot outside Buckingham Palace, the Queen would take her son on an imaginary flight around the world. Hold my hand, and together let's fly up, 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 into the air, across London, across the sea, over the pyramids of Egypt, down the Grand Canyon of America, along the Great Wall of China, and back to dear old Blighty in time for tea. In his mind's eyes, the boy would see everything his mother described. The adventures gave him hope that one day he would be able to leave the palace. Just then, Alfred felt something, or someone, slam down on his shoulders. Doof! He took a sharp intake of breath, but he was so shocked that no sound came out of his mouth. Two large gloved hands were holding on to him. Alfred turned round. It was another royal guard who had somehow crept up onto the boy after he stumbled on the rug. Silent just like the others, he picked the prince up with ease and dragged him back to his bedroom. Let me go, I said. Let me go! Alfred was powerless to resist. In moments, he was deposited back into his bedroom and the door shut behind him. Stum! He lingered behind the door and listened. Outside, the guards waited for a while before the sound of footsteps betrayed his movements. In his head, Alfred counted to 100. As much as he wanted to race through the numbers, he knew that was a foolish idea. He needed to count until he thought the coast would be clear. 97, 98, 99, 100. On 100, he opened his bedroom door slowly and silently. Then he peeped out and checked that no one was around. The corridor was clear, so he tiptoed down it, before hurrying down the long, sweeping staircase and across to the grand ballroom. This room once played host to the world's most extravagant parties. Now it was a ghost of a room. The chandelier was hanging by a thread, the silk curtains drooped on the floor, and damp had blotted the walls with dark, ugly patches. Desperately out of breath, the sickly boy stumbled again. This time he fell flat on his face. Bang! Oof! Alfred noticed that there was some kind of powder on his hands and face. At first, he thought it was dust. The palace was encrusted with the stuff, but it wasn't dust. This had a smell to it that was different. Chalk! Scrambling to his feet, he noticed that there were faint chalk markings all across the vast floor. It was as if the boy was standing at the centre of a life-size chessboard. Someone had tried to rub the lines and markings off, but traces were left behind. Alfred bent down. There were words and symbols, but despite his love of books, he couldn't recognize any of them. What's more, there were burn marks on the wood, and a large discoloured area where something heavy had been moved. Alfred shivered as he realised something. There were strange goings-on in the palace. The boy stood up and walked slap-bang into someone. Doof! Or rather, not someone, but something. The Octobot. A robot programmed to do all a butler's duties. It was meant to make life easier, but it actually made it harder. Much harder. It looked not unlike an octopus. If an octopus were made of metal and trundled across the ground. Crucially, though, it did have 8 arms, each one with a special attachment for performing different tasks. Hence the name Octo for octopus and Butt for butler. Although its name made it sound more like it was an octopus's bottom. The Octobot had the following arm attachments. A spray for spraying nice smells where nasty smells are. A fly swatter for swatting flies. A spoon for stirring a cup of tea. A hand for stroking a corgi. A hoover for hoovering up crumbs. A croquet mallet for playing croquet. A duster for dusting a shelf. And an iron for pressing a shirt. Good morning, Mr. President, jabbered the Octobot. It was always getting things wrong. "Oh, hello, Octobot," whispered Alfred. "I wasn't expecting to bump into you. Please can you keep your voice down?" "Roast chicken," replied the robot, before announcing, "You'll be pleased to know I have boil-washed your pants." With that, the Octobot flung a gigantic pair of unwashed men's underpants at the prince. They must have belonged to some humongous old man. Whoosh! They landed slap bang in the boy's face. "Thank you, Octobot," whispered Alfred, as he removed the still stinky underpants from his nose. "Now, are you ready for your game of croquet?" "No," hissed the boy. The robot swung its croquet mallet arm so hard it bashed the wall. Bang! So hard the arm itself came loose. Bonk! It fell to the floor with a crash. With 7 arms rather than 8, it was now not so much an octobot as a septimobot. Septum is the Latin word for 7. Outside the ballroom, Alfred could hear the bootsteps of royal guards growing nearer. Stomp! 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 The soldiers were just outside the tall wooden double doors that led into the ballroom. "You go that way," urged the boy, spinning the octobot round to face in their direction. "The Pope needs his toenails clipping." "Very good, Princess," came the reply. With all his might, Alfred pushed the octobot so it trundled off in the direction of the doors. As the boy tiptoed out of the ballroom, he looked straight back to see the octobot crash straight into the guards, knocking them into the floor, and accidentally slapping one in the face with its corgi-stroking hand. Slap, slap, slap! The guard grabbed his arm to make the robot stop, and it came off in his hands. "Oh no!" exclaimed the robot. "I will never stroke a corgi again." The poor octobot was now down to 6 arms. It should really be renamed the Sextobot, but that sounds far too rude. Ahead of Alfred was the entrance to the throne room. This was the fortress within the fortress of Buckingham Palace. In a way, it was a panic room, like a giant safe. It had been installed in case of an attack, or horror upon horror, in case the revolutionaries ever managed to break into the palace itself. The walls of the throne room had been made of meter-thick steel. The only way in or out was through a huge metal door, which opened only with fingerprint recognition. Just 2 people had access to that room. The first was the boy's father, the king. The second was the king's chief advisor, the Lord Protector. The Lord Protector was an elegant figure in his 60s. He was well-spoken and refined, and with impeccable manners. A learned man, he spoke with great authority on any subject you might care to mention. Art, literature, philosophy. He wore a black shirt buttoned up to the top without a tie, and a smart grey suit. On his lapel he sported a gold pin badge, which, like a flag and armbands the royal guards wore, depicted a griffin. The Lord Protector had worked at Buckingham Palace for as long as anyone could remember. He started off in the palace library, tending to the thousands of ancient books collected there. The Book of English Martyrs, Saints Through the Ages, Legends of Great Britain, The First King of England, The King's Beasts, Mythical Creatures of the British Isles, The Deaths of Kings and Queens, Medieval Torture, History of the Supernatural, Magic and Spells of the Dark Ages, The World's Worst Dictators, Royal Dogs, A Spotter's Guide, and the Walliams Dictionary. Most of the books were displayed on shelves, but there was a handful kept under lock and key in a cabinet. Only the Lord Protector had the key. Like museum pieces, Alfred was not allowed to take these books up to his room. However, he could look at their covers. One intrigued him the most. It was an ancient red leather-bound book with gold lettering on the front. De Libro Alboin. The boy knew very little Latin, but he knew enough to translate that libro was a word that you often found in library books. It meant book. So this was the Book of Alboin. Once, when he had slipped into the library unnoticed, Alfred saw the Lord Protector studying it. Glancing over the man's shoulder, he saw that there were ornate hand-painted pictures inside. But before he could make out what they were, the Lord Protector had slammed the book shut and locked it back in the case. Of course, this only intrigued the boy more. Over the years, the Lord Protector had gained the trust of the king to the extent that had become his closest advisor. As the country slid into ruin with crops failing and no clean water to drink, the Lord Protector introduced extreme measures in the king's name. Food and water were rationed. There were curfews at night, so people couldn't go outside. Punishments were severe, including execution. The government was outlawed. The army and the police force were disbanded and replaced by the Royal Guard. The Union Jack was replaced by the flag of the Griffin. Since the catastrophic events that had plunged the kingdom into darkness, the king had relied heavily on the Lord Protector to guide him through this terrifying new world. Over the years, the king became more and more withdrawn, as if he disappeared into the back of his mind. No one knew why exactly, but the king, who had once been so full of life, seemed as if he were one of the walking dead. Soon he was ruler only in name. The country was controlled by the Lord Protector. When Alfred spied his mother being held by the royal guards outside the huge metal door to the throne room, he seized his chance. The lady was making a lot of noise and struggling to get away, which distracted the two soldiers. "This is no way to treat your queen! Unhand me! Do you hear? Unhand me at once!" The boy tiptoed behind them, and when the metal door slid open, whoosh, he took a deep breath and sneaked in. That's the end of these chapters, guys. If you enjoyed, please do not forget to like and subscribe, and comment down below which book I should read after this one. See you guys in the next chapters. Bye-bye.